So today we're going to attempt to tackle drill press dust collection. I have kind of an idea in my head on how I want it to work, but we're going to kind of figure it out as we go based on space and how well it works.
One of the reasons dust collection is so tricky to do well on a drill press versus, say, a saw is because on a saw blade, it's only making contact with the wood on a small percentage of the blade's area, so it's pretty predictable to figure out where the dust is going to go. On a drill press, however, the entire end of a bit is going to be making contact at the same time, so wood shavings can literally fly off in any direction. So only having a hose or a port on one side will rarely be effective enough as the shavings fly off in different directions.
First off, I want to enclose the drill bit. This will help contain all the shavings so that they can be sucked up by the dust collector much more efficiently. There are a few things for this enclosure that I haven't completely figured out, but that have to take place in order for this to work. First off, it has to be transparent so we can see what we're doing. Secondly, it needs to be large enough to contain bigger drill bits like a hole saw, like Forstner bits. Third, it has to be adjustable so it can accept different size board thicknesses. And finally, it has to be completely removable so that I'm able to access the chuck and get the chuck key in there when I'm changing drill bits. So to make it transparent, I'm going to use plexiglass. I plan on encasing that in a wooden frame, which hopefully should allow me to attach it to the main base later on. Let's start off by making that wooden frame.
Anytime that I'm making a shop project that I'm figuring it out as I go and it doesn't require a ton of strength, I avoid using fasteners as much as possible. This way, if I need to take it apart and redo it, it's a lot easier. Instead, I'll be using mostly wood glue and then leave a couple of spots clear to put CA glue there. This allows me to instantly bond it with the activator and able to move on to the next step. If the design works out, the CA glue will hold it short term and the wood glue will hold it strong long term. If the design doesn't work out, the small spots of CA glue are easily pried apart, and the wood glue hasn't set up enough yet and can be easily cleaned off, and I don't have a bunch of holes in the workpiece from fasteners.
Now it's time for assembly. I'm going to use CA glue. I'm sure you could use a lot of other things for this. I just happen to have it lay around, and it's a little easier to get down in these cracks than epoxy would be.
One thing I would recommend is using an adhesive with a little longer working time. This stuff set up almost instantly once the plexiglass was down in the slots and it left little room for error.
Next, we need to make the main piece that will attach to the drill press itself. This will allow us to attach the enclosure and our dust collection as well. My thought is to attach it with hose clamps, and if that's not stable enough, we'll throw a magnet or two in there for good measure. So let's get that main piece started and we'll see if it's strong enough.
We're going to pretend this horrible camera angle ever happened and never speak of it again. Now that the main part of the box is built, I want to put a board inside to cut the space in half at an angle and help direct the airflow.
So as we go to mount this, we're going to have to actually notch out 2 spots here to take care of these 2 collars. As you can see, it won't get up past the light here, so we need to notch it out so the hose clamps will sit flush up against this pole. I'm still not 100% sure how I'm going to connect these 2 pieces together, but I can already tell there's a large gap on top of the enclosure that I want to plug up and limit the airflow coming from above. As I cover that with my hand, the shavings inside bounce around a lot less. I'm also going to add some padded feet to the bottom of the enclosure. This will not only allow a little more airflow down below, which I'll talk about more later, it'll also ensure that this doesn't scratch whatever we're working on down below. I had first toyed with the idea of using springs in order to make it adjustable. By doing this, as you had a thicker board, it would compress and then still force the enclosure back down onto the board you're working on. Unfortunately, not only would the spring option be clunky, it still didn't solve the problem of how are we going to attach the enclosure to the main base. So instead, I turned to my trusty friends that I have a love-hate relationship with, more magnets. We're going to use 2 different kinds here. We're going to bring back the refrigerator magnets we used in the last video, and then these are some rare earth bar magnets. This will allow us to have a single point on the actual enclosure, and then they'll be able to slide up and down. These will be mounted to the main base. I will have links in the description below if you'd like to use the same ones that I used in this video.
In order to accommodate the magnets, I had to make the back plate a little bit thicker. We want to make sure the magnets are just below the surface so the impact and wear is on the wood and not the magnets.
Next, we need to cut the slots for the bar magnets themselves. Be sure to plan ahead and that you have your polarities correct when setting this up.
When two of these are side by side and the polarities are facing the same way, the ends will try and push apart, as you can see, so you may have to hold them or clamp them as they start to set up.
The last thing I want to tackle is to fill the gap below the main base. If you're working on a thinner board, that gap is going to be pretty large versus if you're working on a 3/4 inch or 1 inch board, it's not going to be a big deal. However, we want to make sure that we're collecting all the chips no matter the size board we're using. So to tackle that, I'm going to use a brush strip. These are super cheap. They're usually used on CNCs for dust collection, but we're going to use this to plug that gap. All right, so it's all assembled. The reason we wanted to have these little feet at the bottom, not only to protect the piece we're working on, it's also going to allow more airflow from the front. It's not big enough for chips to fall out, but the big thing is that we want to have airflow coming in from the front bottom as much as possible, so as these shavings come off, you have a direct airflow into the back where it's going to collect the dust. So in theory, you'll have air coming from the front that on its way through the dust collector, it's going to go right past where all the chips are and suck it up in a much more direct line, versus if all your air is coming from back here or up top here, it's going to just have them bounce around a lot. You're going to have to clean off the plexiglass much more often than if you can somehow create that direct flow as much as possible. So now we're going to test everything. I'm going to be using a Forstner bit because that tends to make the most mess. I will then collect all the shavings the dust collector missed. We'll brush it off, we'll spray it off with the air hose, and then start on the next test as well. We'll compare at the end which one did the best. Overall, I'm extremely impressed on how it turned out. I even made a few extra holes just because it wasn't leaving anything behind and I wanted to see if I could get it to pick anything up. So is the difference with and without the brush really worth it? In my mind, yes. It's going to clear out the shavings a lot faster. I can see line of sight to the actual bit a lot better, and it's not going to get the plexiglass all dusty from those shavings bouncing around in there. But to some people, it may not be worth it, and that's fine too. If I need to use a large bit like the circle cutting bit, for instance, it's only 2 hose clamps. It comes off in less than 30 seconds and I can use that. but 99% of the time that I'm using a normal drill bit, a Forstner bit, a hole saw bit, it's going to be perfect for what I'm doing.
So one drawback I noticed was that this top piece is actually blocking both the laser crosshairs and the light. So real quick, I'm going to try and knock this piece out, put some plexiglass in there, and then put some supporting walls behind the magnets. And we'll see if that fixes the issue.
So that's it. If you like what you saw or learned something new, feel free to like the video. If you'd like to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe and click the bell so you're notified when new videos are posted. In the last video, I asked your guys' feedback on which video you'd like to see next of the projects I've already completed, and this was the one that the most comments showed up for. So projects that are already done and just need edited are large picture frames, a dog ramp that wraps behind a nightstand, hardware organization, sandpaper storage, a table sled and drill press table, and miter saw dust collection. If any of those jump out at you, please let me know in the comments below and I'll prioritize those next. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Probably work a little better if I actually hooked up the dust hose. Idiot. Mount these two together yet, but one thing I do notice is there's a large gap. This thing is bouncing like crazy.